The desert wind carried the scent of sage and dust across the vast expanse of the Arizona Territory, where the earth cracked beneath the merciless sun of 1873. Here, where the Chiricahua Mountains rose like ancient sentinels against the burning sky, the Apache people had carved out their existence for generations untold. The land was harsh, unforgiving, a place where only the strongest survived, where water was more precious than gold, and where the night sky blazed with stars so bright they seemed to pierce the soul. In the heart of this wilderness, smoke from ceremonial fires spiraled upward into the twilight, mixing with the rhythmic beating of drums that echoed off canyon walls. Tonight was no ordinary night. Tonight, the tribe would witness the selection of a mate for their alpha, a ritual as old as the mountains themselves, steeped in tradition and weighted with the future of their bloodline. Chief Samuel Standing Bear, known to his people as Alpha, stood at the edge of the ceremonial circle, his presence commanding even in stillness. At 32 winters, he was in his prime, his body carved by years of hunting, warfare, and survival. His face bore the marks of leadership, sharp cheekbones weathered by sun and wind, eyes dark as obsidian that missed nothing, and hands scarred from protecting his people. The eagle feather in his hair caught the firelight, a symbol of his status that none dared challenge. The elders chanted in the old tongue, their voices rising and falling like the desert wind itself. Women from neighboring clans had been brought forward, each hoping to be chosen as the Alpha's primary wife, the one who would bear the future leaders of the tribe. It was not merely marriage, but a sacred duty, for the Alpha's bloodline must remain strong to ensure the survival of their people in these changing times. 20 miles south, in the small settlement of Cedar Grove, Margaret Maggie Collins stood at her window, watching the distant glow of Apache fires paint the horizon orange. At 23, she possessed a quiet beauty that belied the tragedy she carried within. Her auburn hair, unusual in these parts, caught the last rays of sunlight like burnished copper, but it was her eyes green as spring grass after rain that held the weight of her secret. The doctor's words from 2 winters past still echoed in her mind. "I'm sorry, Miss Collins, the fever, it's left you unable to bear children." The sickness that had swept through Cedar Grove had taken her parents and left her with this invisible wound that no medicine could heal. In a world where a woman's worth was measured by her ability to provide sons, Maggie had become a beautiful but broken vessel. Her uncle Josiah, the only family she had left, had been pressing her to accept the proposal of Thomas Whitmore, the banker's son. But Maggie knew the truth would eventually surface, bringing shame not just to her but to any man who took her as wife. So she waited, trapped between the devil of revelation and the deep blue sea of solitude. That evening, as fate would weave its cruel thread, Maggie had ventured out to gather healing herbs near the creek, a skill her Cherokee grandmother had taught her before the removal. The plants grew wild where water kissed the earth, and she needed feverfew for Mrs. Henderson's headaches, lost in her task. She hadn't noticed how far she'd wandered from the settlement, nor had she seen the Apache scouts watching from the ridge. The ceremonial choosing had taken an unexpected turn. Several of the women brought forward were found unsuitable, one too old, another already promised, a third showing signs of the wasting sickness. Standing Bear grew impatient. The stars were aligning for the ritual, but without a suitable mate. The ceremony would have to be postponed, bringing questions about his leadership. It was then that Running Wolf, his most trusted scout, appeared at the edge of the firelight. He spoke quickly in Apache, gesturing toward the south. "A woman," he said, "alone by the sacred creek where the deer came to drink. Young, healthy, with hair like flame, surely a sign from the spirits." In the flickering shadows and smoke, misunderstandings were born. Running Wolf had seen Maggie gathering plants with the same careful attention the Apache women used when collecting medicines for childbirth. Her robust appearance, the way she moved with purpose, the basket of herbs, all signs, he believed, of a fertile woman preparing for motherhood. Standing Bear trusted Running Wolf's judgment, Time was short, and the appearance of a lone woman at the sacred creek during the choosing ceremony could only be interpreted as the will of the spirits. He gave the order. Maggie heard them before she saw them, the soft footfalls that white men would have missed entirely. Her grandmother's blood gave her instincts that town living hadn't quite erased, but she was already surrounded. The Apache warriors emerged from the shadows like ghosts, their faces painted for ceremony, eyes reflecting the last light of dusk. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain still. Running was futile and might provoke violence. Her grandmother had told her stories of the Apache proud, honorable when treated with respect, deadly when crossed. Maggie dropped her eyes, showing submission, even as her mind raced for escape. They spoke to her in Apache, then broken English, something about coming and chosen. Fear clouded her understanding, but when they gestured for her to follow, she realized resistance would mean death. As they led her north toward the fires, one thought consumed her: she was being taken as a captive. The alternative, that she was being brought as a potential bride, never crossed her mind. The ceremonial ground erupted in surprised murmurs when the warriors arrived with the white woman, but Standing Bear silenced them with a raised hand. He studied this unexpected offering the spirits had provided. The woman stood with natural grace, despite her fear, her unusual hair marking her as different, special perhaps. Her build suggested strength-wide hips for childbearing, strong arms for work. The fact that she'd been gathering medicine plants at the sacred creek sealed her fate in his mind. Through the translator, an old Mexican captive who'd lived with the tribe for decades, Standing Bear addressed her, but Maggie, overwhelmed by terror and confusion, only caught fragments: honor, chosen, wife, children. The full weight of her situation crashed upon her like a flash flood. They hadn't taken her as a slave. They'd taken her as a bride. Her mind reeled. To refuse would mean death. She'd heard enough frontier stories to know that rejection of such an honor was a mortal insult. But to accept meant living a lie that would eventually destroy her when no children came. The crowd waited. The fire crackled, and Standing Bear's dark eyes bore into hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. In that moment of purest survival instinct, Maggie did the only thing she could. She nodded, dropping her gaze in what they would interpret as maidenly submission, but was truly the first move in a desperate game of deception. She would play the part, stay alive, and find a way to escape before the truth destroyed them both. Standing Bear felt satisfaction settle in his chest. The woman's acquiescence proved the spirits had chosen well. Her trembling he took for proper feminine nervousness, her downcast eyes for modesty. That she was white concerned some of the elders. But times were changing. The blood of strong women, regardless of origin, would strengthen the tribe. And there was something about her, the way the firelight caught her hair, the dignity in her bearing despite her fear, that stirred more than just duty in his heart. The ceremony proceeded with ancient precision. Maggie moved through it like a sleepwalker, guided by gestures and the translator's broken explanations. She drank from the ceremonial cup, allowed the medicine woman to mark her forehead with sacred paint, stood still as Standing Bear draped a beautifully woven blanket around her shoulders, the symbol of his protection and claim. As the drums reached their crescendo and the tribe celebrated the successful choosing, Maggie caught Standing Bear watching her with an expression that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Behind the fierce warrior exterior, she glimpsed something else: hope, perhaps even tenderness. The weight of her deception pressed upon her like a millstone. The stars wheeled overhead. Indifferent to human schemes and sorrows, the ceremony fire burned down to embers, and Maggie found herself being led to a dwelling set apart from the others, the chief's lodge. Standing Bear followed, and as the flap fell closed behind them, sealing her fate, one thought echoed in her mind: she had traded one impossible situation for another, and only the spirits knew how this dangerous game would end. In the dancing shadows cast by the lodge's central fire, she stood frozen, her heart a wild bird in her chest. Standing Bear approached slowly, speaking soft words in Apache she couldn't understand, but whose intent was clear. When he reached for her, Maggie did the only thing her panicked mind could conceive. She swayed on her feet, let her eyes flutter closed, and collapsed as if overwhelmed, feigning the deep unconsciousness that would become her shield in the nights to come. The die was cast. In trying to save herself, Maggie had stepped into a web of deception that would entangle two hearts and challenge everything both she and Standing Bear believed about truth, honor, and the unexpected paths by which love sometimes finds its way. The morning sun crept through the smoke hole of the lodge, painting geometric patterns across the buffalo hide walls. Maggie woke to find herself alone, wrapped in soft furs that smelled of cedar and sage. For a moment, confusion clouded her mind, then memory crashed back like a thunderclap. She sat up quickly, checking her clothing, relieved to find everything intact. Standing Bear had respected her unconscious state, covering her with blankets and leaving her untouched. Outside, the camp stirred to life with sounds both foreign and fascinating. Women called to children in Apache, dogs barked, horses nickered. The normalcy of it all seemed surreal after the previous night's ceremony. Maggie peered through a gap in the lodge covering, studying this new world that had claimed her. The Apache camp was larger than she'd imagined, with dozens of wiki-ups arranged in careful pattern along the creek. Women worked at various tasks, scraping hides, grinding corn, tending fires, while children ran between the dwellings in games of tag. Warriors cleaned weapons or worked with horses in a corral made of stripped branches. It was a complete society, complex and organized, nothing like the savage camps described in Cedar Grove's general store gossip. The lodge flap lifted, and an elderly woman entered carrying a water basket and folded clothing. Her face was a map of years lived under desert sun, but her dark eyes held sharp intelligence. She spoke in Apache, gesturing for Maggie to rise. When Maggie didn't immediately comply, the woman switched to broken English. "You, new wife, wash, dress." She set down her burdens and studied Maggie with unsettling intensity. "I am Walks with Wisdom. I teach you." Maggie accepted the clothing, a beautifully beaded doe-skin dress and moccasins, and allowed Walks with Wisdom to show her to a screened area by the creek for washing. Other women were already there, and conversation stopped as she appeared. Their eyes ranged from curious to hostile, particularly from a striking young woman with elaborate silver jewelry who watched Maggie with unmistakable displeasure. As she bathed in the cold creek water, Maggie's mind raced. She needed to learn, to adapt, to survive until she could find a way home. But more immediately, she needed to understand her position here, the expectations, the dangers. Her grandmother's stories had taught her that Apache women held more autonomy than white society believed. But a chief's wife would face specific pressures, especially regarding children. The dress felt strange against her skin, soft as butter but foreign in its cut and weight. Walks with Wisdom showed her how to braid her unusual hair in the Apache style, decorating it with beaded ties. When they returned to camp, Maggie noticed how the clothing transformed her in the eyes of others. She was no longer the white captive, but something else, not quite Apache, not quite accepted, but marked as Standing Bear's protection. The day's education began immediately. Walks with Wisdom proved a strict but fair teacher, showing Maggie the rhythms of camp life. She learned which roots were gathered for food and which for medicine, how to properly tend a fire to minimize smoke, the complex etiquette of who could speak to whom and when. Her grandmother's teachings helped. She already knew some plant lore and had the patience for women's work that town life hadn't quite erased. At midday, Standing Bear returned from a hunting party, 3 deer slung across pack horses. His eyes found Maggie immediately, and something in his expression made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. He looked pleased to see her in Apache dress, and when he approached, the other women melted away like morning mist. "You are well?" he asked through Walks with Wisdom. who translated with obvious reluctance. Maggie nodded, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered as she'd observed other women doing. "Yes, thank you for your kindness last night." A slight smile touched his stern features. "You were overcome. It happens. The ceremony can be much." He paused, studying her. "Tonight we talk. I teach you our words. You teach me yours." The prospect of extended conversation with him sent panic through her veins, but Maggie forced herself to nod agreeably. When he left to distribute the venison, she caught the silver-decorated woman watching with naked envy. Walks with Wisdom noticed too. "That one is Pale Moon," the old woman said quietly. "She hoped to be chosen. Her father is war chief. Be careful." As afternoon wore on, Maggie found herself swept into the communal work of processing the deer. She'd helped with butchering on her uncle's farm, so the work wasn't entirely foreign. The women began to relax around her as she proved willing to dirty her hands, though Pale Moon maintained her cold distance. Through observation and Walks with Wisdom's occasional translations, Maggie began to piece together the complex web of relationships and hierarchies within the band. Standing Bear commanded absolute respect, but his position required constant validation through wise leadership and, crucially, the continuation of his bloodline. Previous wives had died in childbirth or from white man's diseases, leaving him without heirs. The pressure for her to produce children would be immense. As sunset approached, her anxiety grew. How long could she maintain the pretense of unconsciousness? How long before Standing Bear grew suspicious or, worse, angry? She'd heard stories of Apache torture, though her grandmother had always said those tales were exaggerated by whites who needed to justify their own cruelties. Walks with Wisdom prepared a meal of venison stew and flatbread, showing Maggie how to properly serve her husband, another word that made her stomach clench. When Standing Bear entered the lodge, he'd washed and changed, his hair gleaming with bear grease, wearing clean buckskins decorated with intricate beadwork. They ate in surprisingly companionable silence at first. Then Standing Bear began the promised language lesson, pointing to objects and saying their Apache names, having her repeat until her pronunciation satisfied him. His patience surprised her, as did his quick grasp when she returned the favor with English words. "You learn fast," he said in his careful English. "This is good. A chief's wife must be clever." Maggie felt the weight of expectation in those words. "I'll try to be worthy," she managed. His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "The spirits brought you to the sacred creek. This means something." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I have been alone too long. The people need continuation." There it was, the expectation laid bare. Maggie's mouth went dry. She nodded, unable to speak, her mind desperately searching for delays, excuses, anything to postpone the inevitable revelation of her barrenness. When the meal ended and Standing Bear began to bank the fire for the night, Maggie felt her chest tighten with panic. He turned to her with an expression that was gentle but determined. As he approached, she did the only thing she could think of. She swayed slightly, let her eyes flutter, and began to collapse. But this time, Standing Bear caught her, his reflexes swift as a striking snake. He held her upright, studying her face with sudden suspicion. "Again you faint." His voice held a note of concern mixed with something else, doubt, perhaps. "You are ill." Thinking quickly, Maggie pressed a hand to her abdomen with what she hoped looked like embarrassment. It's my woman's time," she whispered, invoking the one excuse that might grant her reprieve. "I'm sorry, I should have said, among my people. We don't speak of such things." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by what might have been disappointment, but he stepped back respectfully. Among the Apache, as with many tribes, a woman during her moontime was considered spiritually powerful but temporarily set apart. "Ah, this explains much." He guided her to the sleeping firs. "Rest, In 4 days, we speak again." Relief flooded through her so powerfully she nearly did faint in truth. 4 days, a temporary reprieve, but time to think, to plan. As Standing Bear settled on his own furs across the lodge, maintaining proper distance, Maggie curled into her blankets with her back to him. She'd bought herself time, but at what cost each lie compounded the last, building a structure that would eventually collapse. And worse, as she lay listening to his steady breathing, she found herself thinking about his patience during the language lesson, the gentle way he'd caught her when she'd stumbled, the loneliness she'd glimpsed behind his stern chief's mask. Outside, a coyote howled at the rising moon, its cry echoing across the desert like a portent. Maggie closed her eyes and prayed to any god that might be listening, her mother's Christian deity, her grandmother's Cherokee spirits, even the Apache forces that had brought her to this moment. She prayed for wisdom, for time, for a miracle that would somehow resolve the impossible situation she'd created. But the desert night offered no answers, only the steady breathing of the man across the lodge who believed she would give him the future his people needed. In the darkness, Maggie felt the weight of 2 cultures pressing upon her, the white world that had rendered her worthless, and the Apache world that had chosen her for a role she could never fulfill. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new deceptions to navigate. But for tonight, she had this small victory, these stolen moments of reprieve, as sleep finally claimed her. Maggie wondered if Standing Bear's gods were laughing at the cosmic joke of it all, a barren woman chosen to continue a bloodline, pretending to sleep while fully awake to the tragedy unfolding around them both. The days fell into rhythm like beads on a string, each one drawing Maggie deeper into the fabric of Apache life. Morning meant rising before dawn to tend the fire, followed by the trek to the creek for water, a task that required careful balance as she navigated the rocky path with heavy clay vessels. The other women had begun to accept her presence, though Pale Moon's hostility remained sharp as a blade's edge. Maggie discovered that survival required more than just physical adaptation. She needed to understand the intricate social web that bound the band together. Walks with Wisdom proved an invaluable guide, though her teachings came wrapped in stern corrections and occasional cuffs when Maggie's attention wandered. "You grind corn like white woman," the old woman scolded one morning, readjusting Maggie's grip on the stone mano. "Too much hurry, not enough patience. Corn must surrender slowly, like trust." The work was harder than anything Maggie had known in Cedar Grove. Her hands blistered from scraping hides. Her back ached from constant bending, and the desert sun burned her fair skin despite the protective salves the women taught her to make. But there was something oddly satisfying about the communal nature of the work, the way women sang together while processing pine nuts, the shared laughter when someone told a ribald joke. Standing Bear observed her progress from a distance, his presence a constant weight she felt even when he wasn't visible. He maintained respectful distance during what he believed was her woman's time, but she caught him watching her often when she helped tend the children, when she worked alongside the other women, when she practiced Apache words with determined concentration. On the 4th day, as her supposed moon time ended, anxiety crept back like a stalking mountain cat. That evening, Standing Bear appeared at the lodge with purposeful stride, and Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs. But instead of what she feared, he carried 2 horses. "Come," he said in Apache, a word she'd now understood. "I show you our land." Relief at this unexpected reprieve made her almost dizzy. She followed him to the horses, accepting his help to mount the gentle mare he'd chosen for her. Her grandmother had taught her to ride, though side saddle propriety was abandoned here for practical straddling. They rode in companionable silence at first, leaving the camp behind for the vast expanse of desert and mountain. Standing Bear led her up winding trails to a high plateau where the entire territory spread before them like a painted canvas. The setting sun turned the rocks to fire and the distant mountains to purple shadows. "This is Apache land," he said, gesturing broadly. "From those peaks to that valley, for generations beyond memory." His English had improved markedly in their brief lessons. White men come. Say we must move, must change. But this land is in our blood. Maggie heard the pain beneath his pride. It's beautiful, she said honestly. I've never seen anything like it. He dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. They sat on a flat rock, watching the sun paint its farewell across the sky. Tell me of your people, he said unexpectedly. Your family. The question caught her off guard. My parents died 2 winters ago. Fever took them. She paused, choosing her words carefully. My grandmother was Cherokee. She taught me about plants, about respect for the land. His eyebrows rose slightly. Cherokee, then you are not fully white. Half, Maggie admitted. My mother's mother. She died when I was young, but I remember her teachings. This explains much, Standing Bear said thoughtfully. Why you learn our ways quickly. Why the spirits brought you to us. He turned to face her fully. Margaret Maggie, I chose you not just for duty. You have strength, grace, the way you work, never complaining. This speaks well. The sincerity in his voice made her stomach twist with guilt. I'm not what you think, she said quietly. No, he smiled slightly. What do I think? That I'm some perfect woman who will... She couldn't finish the sentence. Perfect, he laughed, a rich sound she hadn't heard before. No one is perfect. My first wife, Dancing Crane, could not cook. Everything she made tasted like ash. My second wife, Blue River, feared horses so much she walked everywhere. But they were good women, brave women. His expression grew somber. The white man's sickness took them both. They sat in silence as stars began to pierce the darkening sky. Maggie found herself studying his profile, the strong nose, the firm jaw, the way his eyes reflected depths of loss and responsibility. He was not the savage of frontier tales, but a man carrying the weight of his people's future. Why show me this? She asked finally. Because a wife should know what she protects, he replied. The children you will bear. He paused at her involuntary flinch. They will inherit this. They must be strong enough to hold it against those who would take it. The ride back to camp was quiet. Maggie lost in turmoil. His expectations were clear, reasonable even from his perspective. A chief needed heirs. The band needed future leaders. And she was living a lie that grew heavier with each passing day. That night, as they prepared for sleep, Standing Bear approached her with clear intent. Panic fluttered in her chest, but before she could react, he simply took her hand. I have been patient, he said softly, but patience has limits. Tomorrow, you become my wife in truth. Maggie's mind raced. Another excuse might work once, but not repeatedly. She thought of the women's gossip she'd overheard, their crude jokes about marriage beds and male pride. An idea formed desperate, potentially dangerous, but perhaps her only option. She nodded shyly, letting him draw her close, but when he leaned in to kiss her, she turned her face aside with apparent nervousness. He tried again, and she pulled back slightly, covering her reaction with downcast eyes and trembling that wasn't entirely feigned. I've never, she whispered, playing the virgin's part. Please be patient with me. Understanding and something like tenderness crossed his features. Of course, I will be gentle. What followed was a careful dance of approach and retreat. Each time Standing Bear tried to deepen their intimacy, Maggie found ways to deflect a nervous giggle, exaggerated shyness, clumsy movements that disrupted the moment. She could see his growing frustration tempered by his determination not to frighten her. Finally, he pulled back with a heavy sigh. Perhaps you need more time to know me, to trust. The disappointment in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. I'm sorry, Maggie whispered, and meant it. I want to be a good wife. Shh. He stroked her hair with surprising gentleness. We have time. The spirits brought you for a reason. That reason will reveal itself. As he settled back on his own furs, clearly struggling with desire and duty. Maggie curled into her blankets with a mixture of relief and self-loathing. How many times could she play this game? How long before his patience truly ran out? Over the following days, she threw herself into learning with renewed determination. If she couldn't be the wife he needed in one way, perhaps she could prove her worth in others. She mastered the art of peaky bread. Thin as paper and perfectly cooked, she learned to read weather signs, to identify healing herbs, to sing the grinding songs that made work pass more pleasantly. The children especially drew her. Unlike the adults, they held no suspicions or expectations beyond the moment. She taught them string games her grandmother had shown her, told stories that bridged Cherokee and Apache traditions. Standing Bear often found her surrounded by laughing children, and something in his expression during those moments made her heart ache. Pale Moon watched these interactions with calculating eyes. One afternoon, as Maggie helped train a young girl in beadwork, Pale Moon approached with deliberate steps. "You work hard to prove yourself," she said in carefully pronounced English. "But some things cannot be hidden forever." Maggie's blood chilled. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Pale Moon's smile was sharp. "I watch. I see. A woman who shrinks from her husband's touch. A woman who finds excuse after excuse. Perhaps you're not woman at all, but something else wearing woman's shape." The accusation hung between them like a drawn blade. Maggie forced herself to remain calm. "Standing Bear chose me. The spirits brought me. That should be enough." "For now," Pale Moon agreed. "But winter comes. The people will expect announcement of new life. What will you do then?" She walked away, leaving Maggie shaken. The threat was clear produce children or face exposure, but there was no child to produce, no miracle to save her from the web of lies she'd woven. That evening, she found Standing Bear teaching a group of young warriors about reading white man's tracks. His patience with their questions, his clear explanations, his obvious care for their development, all of it painted a picture of a man who would be a devoted father. The tragedy of her deception felt like a physical weight. When he returned to their lodge, she'd prepared his favorite meal and waited with the proper deference of an Apache wife. He seemed pleased but wary, as if expecting another rebuff. "You are troubled," he observed after they'd eaten. "Pale Moon spoke to you today." Nothing escaped his notice. Maggie nodded carefully. "She questions my place here." "Pale Moon questions many things," he said dismissively. "Her father fills her head with ambition, but I did not choose her. I chose you." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You could have had anyone. Someone who understood your ways from birth. Someone who what?" He moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. "Someone who looks at children with such longing it makes my chest tight. Someone who works until her hands bleed without complaint. Someone whose spirit calls to mine even when her body pulls away." The raw honesty in his words undid her. Tears she'd held back for days finally spilled over. Standing Bear reached out, thumbing them away with surprising gentleness. "Whatever frightens you," he said softly, "we face together. This is what marriage means. Trust me with your fears." For a moment, Maggie teetered on the edge of confession. The truth burned in her throat, demanding release, but looking into his eyes that held such hope, such growing affection, she couldn't do it. Not yet, perhaps not ever. Instead, she leaned into his touch, letting him hold her as she cried for all the things that could never be. He murmured comfort in Apache, stroking her hair, never pressing for more than she could give. Outside, the camp settled into nighttime quiet. Inside the lodge, two people held each other in the flickering firelight, one offering comfort without understanding its cause, the other accepting it while drowning in deception. The tragedy grew with each tender moment, each gentle word, each day that passed without the truth that would shatter everything they were cautiously building. The autumn moon hung full and bright over the Apache camp. casting silver shadows between the wiki-ups. 2 months had passed since Maggie's arrival, and the subtle shift in Standing Bear's behavior had not gone unnoticed by the band, where once he maintained the stoic distance expected of a chief. Now he sought her company at every opportunity, his eyes following her with an intensity that sparked whispers around the cook fires. Maggie had perfected her role as the dutiful but mysteriously reticent wife. Each night brought new variations of the same dance. Standing Bear's patient advances met with artful deflections, nervous trembling, and occasionally strategic tears. She hated herself for the manipulation, even as she recognized it as survival. But something unexpected had happened during those 2 months. The man she'd initially feared had revealed layers she never anticipated. She'd watched him mediate disputes with Solomon-like wisdom, seen him share his own rations when families faced hardship, observed his gentle handling of horses that others deemed unbreakable. Most dangerously, she'd felt her heart race when his rare smiles appeared, usually prompted by some small success of hers in mastering Apache ways. "Your husband speaks of you often," Walks with Wisdom mentioned one morning as they gathered pinon nuts. "He tells the council you have the wisdom of one born to our ways." Maggie concentrated on filling her basket, fighting the warmth that spread through her chest. "He is kind to say so." "Kind?" the old woman snorted. "Standing Bear is many things: brave, stubborn, fair, but kind is not a word used lightly. He grows soft for you. This is both good and dangerous." The warning in her tone was clear. A chief perceived as weak invited challenges, and Pale Moon's father, Striking Eagle, had been particularly vocal about the lack of pregnancy announcement. The pressure mounted daily, evident in the meaningful looks from other wives, the less than subtle questions about her health, the way conversations stopped when she approached. That evening, Standing Bear returned from a successful raid against Mexican soldiers who'd been harassing Apache families near the border. The warriors brought back horses and supplies, but more importantly, they'd driven the threat away without losing a single man. The camp erupted in celebration. Maggie watched from the doorway of their lodge as Standing Bear received accolades with characteristic humility, deflecting praise to his warriors while ensuring fair distribution of captured goods. When his eyes found hers across the crowd, the warmth in them made her breath catch. He excused himself and strode toward her with purpose. "Walk with me," he said, taking her hand without waiting for response. They slipped away from the celebration, following a moonlit path to a grove of cottonwoods by the creek. The sounds of drums and singing faded behind them, replaced by the whisper of leaves and gurgling water. "You're proud of today's success," Maggie observed, noting the energy thrumming through him. "Pride is dangerous," he replied, but his slight smile betrayed him. "Yet, yes, no blood spilled, but message sent. The Mexicans will think twice before threatening our families again. You protected them without violence. That takes more strength than fighting." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "You understand this. Many would call for blood, for revenge, but you see the harder path." His hands came up to frame her face. "This is why the spirit sent you. You think like a chief's wife should think." The moonlight caught the angles of his face, and Maggie found herself mesmerized by the play of light and shadow. When he lowered his head toward hers, she didn't pull away. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, then deeper when she didn't resist. For a moment, she let herself forget everything: the lies, the impossibilities, the ticking clock of discovery. There was only the solid warmth of him, the way her body fitted against his as if designed for this purpose, the racing of her heart that had nothing to do with fear. But reality crashed back as his hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer with clear intent. The familiar panic rose, and she broke away, pressing her face against his chest to hide her expression. We should return," she whispered. "The celebration." She felt his chest rise and fall with a heavy sigh, but he didn't press. "Always you run, little rabbit," he said softly, What do you fear, that I will hurt you, that I am not gentle enough? No. The denial came too quick, too forceful. You've been nothing but patient. It's not you, it's... Then what? His voice held frustration now. 2 moons have passed. The people begin to talk. Striking Eagle suggests perhaps I chose wrongly, that a white woman cannot... I'm not fully white, she interrupted, surprising them both with her vehemence. My grandmother's blood flows in me too. I am trying to be what you need. Truly I am. I do not need perfection, he said, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. I need a wife, a partner, a woman who shares my bed without fear, who will give me children to carry our ways forward. Can you be this? The direct question hung between them like a challenge. Maggie's mind raced for another excuse, another delay, but found only emptiness. She'd used every tactical retreat available monthly cycles, feigned illness, exaggerated innocence. The well of deception was running dry. I want to be, she said finally, the first completely honest thing she'd said about the matter. Give me until the next new moon. Let me prepare myself mentally, spiritually. Among my grandmother's people, there were rituals, ways to ensure a strong child. Please. Standing Bear studied her for a long moment. She could see the war in his eyes, desire battling with respect, duty clashing with growing affection. Finally, he nodded. 1 more moon cycle. But then, Maggie, you must decide. Be my wife in truth, or tell me why you cannot. No more shadows between us. They walked back to camp in thoughtful silence. The celebration continued, but Standing Bear's mood had shifted. He fulfilled his duties as chief, but Maggie caught him watching her with an expression that mixed longing with something else, doubt, perhaps, or the first stirrings of suspicion. Over the following days, Maggie threw herself into a desperate charade of preparation. She consulted walks with wisdom about fertility rituals, gathered specific herbs, performed cleansing ceremonies at dawn. All of it was genuine in its own way. She was preparing, just not for what everyone assumed. The other wives watched with approval and growing excitement. Even Pale Moon seemed momentarily mollified. Though her sharp eyes missed nothing, Standing Bear maintained careful distance, honoring her request for spiritual preparation. But his presence was constant, a warmth at her back during communal meals, a steady hand when she stumbled on rocky paths, small gifts left where she would find them. One afternoon, as she helped repair a torn wiki-up cover, she overheard Striking Eagle speaking to other warriors. A chief without sons is like an arrow without a point, he said, his voice carrying deliberately. Perhaps it is time to consider if Standing Bear has lost the favor of the spirits. You speak out of turn. Another warrior, Red Crow, replied sharply. Standing Bear has led us well through difficult times. Yes, but for how long the white soldiers grow bolder? We need assurance of strong leadership for generations. If his white woman cannot provide this... Maggie's hand stilled on the hide she was stitching. The threat was becoming more explicit. Standing Bear's position, she realized, was more precarious than she'd understood. A chief ruled by consensus, not decree, if enough people lost faith. That evening, she found Standing Bear sitting alone on a ridge above camp, his silhouette dark against the painted sunset sky. She approached quietly, settling beside him without speaking. You heard Striking Eagle today? He said without preamble. Yes. He is not wrong. A chief must think beyond his own lifetime. He picked up a stone, turning it in his fingers. Dancing Crane lost 3 babies before the sickness took her. Blue River died birthing our son, who lived only hours. Perhaps I am cursed in this way. The pain in his voice lanced through her. You're not cursed, Maggie said firmly. Those were tragedies, not judgments from the spirits. Then why do you fear my touch? The question came soft but direct. What have you seen in visions that makes you pull away? She couldn't answer. Couldn't lie anymore, but couldn't speak truth either. Instead, she did something that surprised them both. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I've seen a good man," she said quietly. "A leader who deserves better than—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "Better than what?" "Than a woman full of secrets," she finished in a whisper. He turned their joined hands over, studying them in the fading light. "We all have secrets. I have taken scalps I do not boast about. I have made choices that haunt my sleep. But with you—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "With you, I had hoped for something clean, new, a future untainted by past sorrows." The weight of his hope pressed against her chest like a physical thing. She wanted to give him that future, wanted it with a desperation that surprised her. But wanting couldn't change the barren landscape of her womb any more than it could make the desert bloom in drought. "The new moon approaches," he said finally. "Whatever ritual you perform, whatever preparation you need, complete it. Then come to me without fear, without shadows. Can you promise this?" Maggie looked into his eyes, those dark pools that had seen so much loss, that held such guarded hope, and made the only promise she could. "When the new moon comes, there will be truth between us," she said, meaning every word while knowing it would likely destroy everything. He squeezed her hand once, then rose, pulling her up with him. Together they walked back to camp, where cook fires dotted the darkness like earthbound stars. The next weeks would bring either revelation or deeper deception, confession or catastrophe. As they reached their lodge, Standing Bear paused. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "know that these moons with you have been good. You have brought something I had forgotten. Perhaps that is enough." But it wasn't enough, Maggie knew. Not for him, not for the band, not for the future that everyone expected her to provide. She entered the lodge with the weight of the coming reckoning heavy on her shoulders, counting the days until the new moon would rise and all pretense would have to end, one way or another. The whispers began like smoke from a poorly tended fire, wisping through the camp in fragments and suspicious glances. 3 full moons had passed since Maggie's arrival, and still no announcement of new life quickening in the chief's wife. Pale Moon had been particularly industrious in her observations, noting every morning when Maggie emerged from the creek without the telltale sickness of early pregnancy. "Perhaps she is barren," Pale Moon suggested to a group of women grinding corn, her voice carrying just far enough to ensure the words would travel. "In my grandmother's time, such women were sent back to their people." "Hold your tongue," Walks with Wisdom snapped, but even she couldn't hide the concern in her ancient eyes. "The spirits work in their own time." Maggie heard these exchanges, felt the weight of scrutiny growing heavier each day. She'd managed to extend her reprieve through a combination of claimed spiritual preparation and carefully timed woman's troubles. But Standing Bear's patience was fraying like rope against stone. Worse, she'd seen him notice the calculating looks from Striking Eagle and his supporters. That morning, as she helped prepare herbs for the medicine woman, Running Wolf appeared at her side. The scout who'd first found her rarely spoke to women, making his presence notable. "The chief asks for you," he said in careful English. "Council meeting." Maggie's stomach dropped. Wives weren't typically summoned to council unless their marriage was being discussed. She smoothed her dress with trembling hands and followed Running Wolf to the central meeting ground. The council sat in a semicircle, with Standing Bear at the center. His face revealed nothing, but she'd learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested on his knife hilt, not threatening, but seeking comfort in familiar things. Striking Eagle sat to his right, satisfaction barely concealed in his weathered features. "Sit," Standing Bear instructed, gesturing to a place beside him. The position itself was telling, still acknowledging her as his wife, but the formality of the summons suggested that status was under question. Striking Eagle spoke first, his words measured and seemingly respectful. 3 moons have passed since our chief took a new wife. The people rejoice in his happiness, but—" he paused dramatically. "We must think of the future. A chief without heirs invites challenge from enemies who see weakness." "My marriage is young still," Standing Bear replied evenly. "Many couples wait longer before the spirits bless them with children." "True," Striking Eagle conceded. "But there are concerns, observations." He turned his sharp gaze to Maggie. "The women speak of strange behaviors, excessive modesty, frequent illnesses that prevent wifely duties. Some wonder if perhaps our chief's wife carries some white woman's curse." The accusation hung in the air like a drawn blade. Maggie felt every eye upon her, waiting for her defense. Her mind raced, but before she could speak, Standing Bear rose to his feet. "You forget yourself, Striking Eagle. My wife has proven herself in every way. She works harder than many born to our ways. She tends the sick with skill. She has brought honor to this band. If the spirits have not yet blessed us with children, perhaps they wait for hearts free of poison and suspicion." The rebuke landed hard, but Striking Eagle was not easily deterred. "I mean no disrespect, but the people talk. They wonder. A chief must have the full confidence of his band. Perhaps if your wife could assure us that all is, as it should be." All eyes turned to Maggie. This was her moment to lie once more, or to finally speak truth. She stood slowly, drawing on every ounce of courage her Cherokee grandmother had bred into her bones. "I understand the concerns," she began, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I know what is expected of a chief's wife. I have not fulfilled that duty. And for this, I am deeply sorry." Standing Bear's hand moved slightly, whether to support or silence her. She couldn't tell. She pressed on before courage failed. "But I ask you, this is a woman only valuable for her womb. Have I not proven my worth in other ways? Have I not?" "Pretty words." Pale Moon interrupted from her place among the women. "But they do not answer the question. Can you bear children or not?" The blunt demand sliced through all pretense. Maggie felt Standing Bear tense beside her. This was the precipice she'd balanced on for 3 moons, and there was nowhere left to step but into the void. Her voice caught. She cleared her throat, lifted her chin. "I was ill 2 winters ago. The same fever that took my parents. The doctor said—" She couldn't finish, but the meaning was clear. The silence that followed was deafening. She couldn't look at Standing Bear, couldn't bear to see the betrayal that must be written on his face. Around the circle, expressions ranged from shock to satisfaction to pity. "You knew this when you came here." Striking Eagle's voice held triumph poorly disguised as outrage. "You deceived our chief, deceived all of us." "I didn't choose to come here," Maggie fired back, finding strength in anger. "I was brought here, taken from my own people. I did what I had to do to survive." "Enough!" Standing Bear's voice cut through the growing tumult. When Maggie finally looked at him, his face was carved stone, revealing nothing. "The council will adjourn. I will consider this matter privately." He strode away without looking at her, leaving Maggie standing alone in the circle of judgment. Walks with Wisdom approached, her ancient face creased with something that might have been sympathy. "Come," the old woman said. "This is not the place for you now." But where was her place? Not in the chief's lodge. Surely. Not after this revelation. Maggie followed Walks with Wisdom to her wickiup, where she collapsed on a buffalo robe, shaking with released tension. "You should have told him privately," Walks with Wisdom said, offering water. "Men do not like surprises, especially in front of others." "I tried," Maggie said, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. "Every time I started to tell him, I couldn't bear to see him look at me differently. And now he'll send me away. Or worse." She'd heard stories of what happened to women who deceived powerful men. Walks with Wisdom studied her with those knowing eyes. "You think our chief is cruel?" I think he's a man who needed something I can't give, who trusted me and I—" The tears came then, hot and bitter. The old woman let her cry, offering no empty comfort. When the storm passed, she spoke quietly. I have lived many seasons, seen many things. I have seen women who bore many children but brought no joy. I have seen barren women who enriched their bands in other ways. The spirits make us each for a purpose. Try telling that to Striking Eagle or to Standing Bear. Standing Bear must tell it to himself. But first, his pride must heal. You wounded him, not with your barrenness, but with your deception. Trust, once broken. She shook her head. As the day wore on, Maggie remained in Walks with Wisdom's care. She could hear the camp buzzing with gossip, could imagine the conversations, the speculation. Near sunset, Running Wolf appeared again. "The chief commands your presence," he said formally. Maggie's heart hammered as she followed him. Not to the chief's lodge, but to the same ridge where she and Standing Bear had sat together so many evenings. He stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the dying light. "You lied to me," he said without turning. "Every day, every night, every moment, all lies." "Not all," she said quietly. "Not everything was a lie." He turned then, and the pain in his eyes was worse than anger would have been. "What was truth? Tell me, so I can know the difference." "My respect for you. My feelings." She struggled for words. "The way I felt when you smiled at me, when you were patient with the children, when you led with wisdom instead of force, that was all true." "Feelings." He spoke the word like it tasted bitter. "Can feelings lead my band into the future? Can feelings carry on our traditions when I am gone?" "No," she admitted. "But neither can a child born of duty without love. You deserve better than that." "What I deserve and what I need are different things." He moved closer, and she could see the war in his face, hurt, anger, and something else. "Why didn't you tell me those first days? I would have sent you back safely. No shame, no judgment. Why continue the deception?" The truth was complex, tangled with fear and growing affection and the desperate need to belong somewhere. At first, I was afraid. Then I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to stop being your wife, even if I could never be the wife you needed. You made that choice for both of us. You took my honor, made me a fool before my people." "I know," the words came out broken. "I'm sorry. I'm so—" "Sorry changes nothing," but his voice had lost some of its edge. "The council will meet again tomorrow. Striking Eagle calls for annulment, says the marriage was built on false promises. Others wait to hear what I decide." "What will you decide?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him truly seeing her for perhaps the first time not as the woman he'd hoped she was, but as the woman she actually was. Flawed, deceptive, barren, but also brave in her own way, hard-working, clever, and genuinely caring for his people. "I don't know," he admitted. "Go now. Sleep in Walks with Wisdom's lodge tonight. Tomorrow." He turned away. "Tomorrow the spirits will guide us." Maggie wanted to reach out, to offer comfort or seek it, but the chasm between them felt too wide. She left him there on the ridge, a solitary figure against the darkening sky, and made her way back to uncertainty. That night, as she lay on borrowed furs in a borrowed lodge, she could hear drums from somewhere in the camp. Not celebration drums, these were deeper, more solemn, prayers, perhaps, or ceremonies for guidance. She thought of Standing Bear alone in the lodge they'd shared, surrounded by the small domesticities of their false marriage, her grinding stones, his war shirt she'd been mending, the blanket they'd sat on while he taught her Apache words. The new moon rose thin as a blade over the desert, marking the time she'd promised truth between them. She'd kept that promise, though later and more brutally than intended. Now all that remained was to face whatever consequences the dawn would bring. Dawn came pale and cold over the Apache camp, and with it, a summons Maggie had dreaded. Standing Bear had made his decision not for immediate annulment, but for something more complex. She would remain his wife, but with conditions that would either prove her worth beyond childbearing or expose her as truly unsuitable for the role. "You will participate in the women's gathering expedition," Walks with Wisdom informed her. 3 days in the mountains. It is dangerous work, usually only for those born to it. The chief says if you return successfully, it will show the spirits favor you despite your limitation. Maggie understood the subtext. This was a test, possibly designed for her to fail or flee. But there was something else in Standing Bear's challenge, a thread of hope, perhaps that she might prove herself valuable in other ways. The morning of departure, she joined 6 other women, including Pale Moon, who smiled with barely concealed satisfaction. They would travel high into the Chiricahua peaks to gather sacred plants that only grew near the snow line, medicines crucial for the coming winter but difficult and dangerous to obtain. As they climbed higher, the terrain grew treacherous. Maggie's legs burned. Her lungs fought for the thin air, but she pressed on, drawing on reserves she didn't know she possessed. By nightfall, they'd made camp in a high meadow where the stars seemed close enough to touch. "You struggle," Pale Moon observed as Maggie tended her blistered feet. "Perhaps you should turn back." "Perhaps you should mind your own path," Maggie replied, earning surprised laughter from the other women. On the second day, disaster struck. A mountain storm rolled in without warning, turning the clear morning into a chaos of wind and sleet. The women sought shelter among the rocks, but Singing Dove, the youngest among them, slipped on wet stone and tumbled down a steep slope, her ankle twisting grotesquely. Without thinking, Maggie plunged after her, her grandmother's teachings flooding back. She splinted the ankle with branches and strips torn from her own dress, then organized the others to create a travois. But they were still a day's climb from the sacred plants, and returning now would mean failure for everyone. "Go on," Maggie told them. "I'll stay with Singing Dove. Keep her warm and safe. You gather what we came for." "The storm," one woman protested. "I've survived worse," Maggie said with more confidence than she felt. "Go! The band needs those medicines!" Even Pale Moon looked uncertain, but they ultimately agreed. Maggie built a shelter against the rocks, gathered dry wood from protected crevices, and settled in to wait. Through the night, she kept the fire going and Singing Dove warm, telling stories to distract from the pain, rationing their water carefully. The storm passed near dawn, leaving the world crystalline and dangerous with ice. When the others returned, laden with the precious plants, they found Maggie and Singing Dove safe, the younger woman's fever broken through careful tending. The journey down proved even more treacherous. Maggie and another woman took turns supporting Singing Dove, navigating ice-slicked paths with painstaking care. By the time they reached camp, word of their adventure had already spread. Standing Bear was waiting with the medicine man, his face unreadable as they took Singing Dove for healing. But when Maggie swayed on her feet, exhausted beyond measure, his hand steadied her elbow. "You did well," he said quietly. "Singing Dove's mother wishes to thank you." "I did what anyone would do." "No," Pale Moon interjected, surprising them both. "Not anyone. I was wrong about you." The admission clearly cost her, but she made it publicly. "You proved yourself up there." That evening, the camp celebrated the successful gathering and Singing Dove's rescue. Maggie found herself pulled into the circle of women with new acceptance, their songs including her naturally now. But she noticed Standing Bear watching from across the fire, his expression thoughtful. Later, as she helped distribute the gathered medicines, she overheard a conversation between elders. The white woman showed courage, one said, and wisdom. Not all gifts come from the womb. "But a chief needs heirs," another countered. Courage doesn't secure the future. Perhaps, the first replied. But neither does a son born to a woman without courage. Standing Bear must think beyond the simple answer. As the celebration wound down, Maggie found herself alone by the creek, washing the trail dust from her face and hands. The water was cold, shocking her tired muscles into alertness. She sensed rather than heard Standing Bear's approach. "You could have let Singing Dove fail," he said. "It would have turned the people against the test, made them see it as too harsh. That would have been cruel. She's barely 16, just married herself. She has her whole life ahead. A life you saved, at risk to your own." He sat on a river rock, his posture less rigid than she'd seen since the revelation. "I've been thinking about deception, about truth, about what makes a marriage." Maggie waited, afraid to speak and break whatever fragile thread was spinning between them. "My first wife gave me no children, but I mourned her deeply. My second gave me a son who lived only hours, but those hours were not worth more than all the years with Dancing Crane." He picked up a smooth stone, turning it in his fingers. "Striking Eagle sees only one path to the future, but perhaps the spirits show us another way." "What way is that?" "I don't know yet." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "But I know sending you away would be wrong, not just for what you did in the mountains, but for—" he struggled with words. "For the way the children laugh when you tell stories, for how you've brought new healing knowledge to merge with our own, for the peace I feel when—" He stopped abruptly. "I never meant to bring you pain," Maggie said softly. "If I could change what I am—" "No." The word came sharp. "We cannot change what we are, but perhaps we can change what we believe is possible." They sat in silence as the moon, fuller now than when she'd made her promise of truth, reflected in the moving water. Finally, Standing Bear rose. "Come back to our lodge," he said simply. "Whatever the future holds, you are still my wife." As they walked back together, Maggie felt something shift in the space between them. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not yet, but perhaps the beginning of a new understanding. The camp had settled into nighttime quiet, but she sensed watchful eyes tracking their progress, reading meaning in their proximity. Inside the lodge, familiar yet strange after her night away, Standing Bear spoke again. "Tomorrow, I address the council. I will tell them you remain my wife, that the spirits may have purposes we don't yet understand. Some will challenge this. Striking Eagle certainly will. And if they demand you take another wife, one who can give you children—" His jaw tightened. "That is tomorrow's battle. Tonight—" He moved closer, not with the desperate passion of before, but with something quieter, deeper. "Tonight I want to know my wife, the real one. No pretense, no expectations, just truth." They talked through the night, sharing stories they'd held back before. Maggie spoke of her parents' death, the devastating diagnosis, her fears and dreams. Standing Bear revealed his own losses, his doubts about leadership, his struggle to balance tradition with the changing world encroaching on Apache lands. As dawn approached, they lay side by side, not as lovers but as something perhaps more precious, two people who'd seen each other's worst deceptions and deepest truths and chosen to move forward together anyway. "There will be difficulties," Standing Bear said into the pre-dawn darkness. "The people expect—" "I know." Maggie found his hand, intertwining their fingers. "But I'm not afraid anymore. Whatever comes, we face it honestly now. Even if it means I must take a second wife eventually for the band's future." The question hung heavy between them. Maggie thought of the Apache women she'd come to know, their strength and complexities, their acceptance of plural marriage as necessity in a harsh world. "Even then," she said finally, "if that's what's needed. But first, let's see what the spirits truly intend. Maybe there are other ways to secure the future alliances through wisdom rather than blood, teachings that outlast any single lifetime." Standing Bear squeezed her hand. Outside, the camp stirred to life, bringing with it all the challenges they'd face. But for this moment, in the gray between night and morning, they had found something worth preserving, a partnership built not on deception or duty, but on the harder, rarer foundation of truth accepted and trust slowly rebuilt. The test in the mountains had proven Maggie's courage to others. Now would come the greater test, whether that courage could sustain a marriage that defied every expectation, that asked both partners to imagine a different kind of future than either had planned. The winter moon hung like a silver coin over the Apache camp, marking 6 moons since Maggie's arrival. The past weeks had brought an uneasy equilibrium. Standing Bear had declared to the council that his wife would remain, that the spirits might reveal their purposes in time, but whispers persisted like smoke through the wiki-ups, and Striking Eagle's challenges grew bolder with each passing day. Maggie had found her place among the women, her healing skills now openly sought and her counsel valued. Yet the absence of a swelling belly remained a silent accusation, a monthly disappointment that even Standing Bear's steadfast support couldn't entirely shield her from. It was Pale Moon, surprisingly, who approached her one crisp morning with an unexpected proposition. "There is a way," she said quietly, pulling Maggie aside from the communal fire. "A deception that could buy you time, perhaps even acceptance." Maggie's guard went up immediately. "I'm finished with deceptions." "Are you?" Pale Moon glanced around, then continued in a lower voice. "Red Sky lost her husband to the white soldiers 3 moons ago. She carries his child but has no protection, no status. You need a child but cannot bear one. Do you not see?" The suggestion took Maggie's breath away. "You're proposing I pretend to carry her child? That's survival," Pale Moon finished. "For both of you, Red Sky faces hardship alone. You face continued challenges to your position. Standing Bear needs an heir. Sometimes the spirits work through unexpected paths. Standing Bear would never agree to such deception, not after—" "Then don't tell him, not at first." Pale Moon's eyes held a calculating gleam that reminded Maggie why she'd feared her initially. "Begin the symptoms. Let him believe. By the time truth must emerge, perhaps his heart will be ready to accept a solution that serves everyone." Maggie walked away from the conversation deeply troubled. The proposal felt like stepping back into the web of lies she'd only recently escaped. Yet, as she watched Red Sky struggling with morning sickness while trying to maintain her work, she couldn't deny the elegant solution it presented. That evening, she found Standing Bear teaching young boys to fletch arrows, his patience endless as small fingers struggled with the precise work. The sight pierced her heart. He would make such a good father. Deserved the chance to guide a child as carefully as he guided those arrows. "You're troubled," he observed later in their lodge, reading her mood with the awareness that had grown between them. "Always watching," she said, attempting lightness. "A woman can't have a moment's private thought. Your thoughts haven't been private since you started grinding corn like you were punishing it." His slight smile took the edge off the words. "What weighs on you?" She almost told him then about Pale Moon's suggestion, about the temptation to solve everyone's problems with another lie. But looking into his eyes that had learned to trust her again through careful, honest steps, she couldn't. "Just thinking about the future," she said instead, "about what happens when my patience runs out, when the council demands action." He moved closer, taking her hands. "I've been thinking too. There are precedents, chiefs who adopted sons from within the band, who passed leadership through merit rather than blood. Striking Eagle would never accept that. Striking Eagle sees only one path because it leads to his son inheriting." Standing Bear's voice held an edge. "But perhaps it's time for new thinking." A commotion outside interrupted them shouts. "Running feet! The sound of horses!" Standing Bear grabbed his weapons and ducked out, Maggie following. Warriors were mounting up, women gathering children with practiced efficiency. "Soldiers," Running Wolf reported breathlessly. 2 days' ride south, They attacked a Mescalero band, killed many. Survivors say they're heading this way. Standing Bear's transformation was instant from husband to war chief. He began issuing rapid orders, sending scouts in all directions, organizing defenses. But what struck Maggie most was his inclusion of her in the war council that followed. "You know the white man's thinking better than most here," he said when Striking Eagle protested. "Your council could save lives." Through the night, they planned. Maggie suggested deceptions based on what she knew of military assumptions, false camps to confuse scouts, evidence of disease to discourage approach. Her grandmother's stories of Cherokee resistance provided tactics the Apache hadn't considered. "The soldiers expect savages," she said, using the hateful word deliberately. "They don't expect strategic thinking. Use their blindness against them." Even Striking Eagle listened with grudging respect as she outlined diversions and misdirections. By dawn, the plan was set not for direct confrontation, but for leading the soldiers on an exhausting chase through terrain that would punish them while the Apache melted away like smoke. As warriors prepared to ride out, Standing Bear pulled Maggie aside. "If something happens—" "Nothing will happen," she said firmly. "You're too clever and they're too stupid." He smiled at that, the expression transforming his face. "Still, you should know, these moons with you, even with the difficulties, have been good. Whatever comes next." She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her complex feelings into the gesture. When they parted, his eyes held something that made her chest tight. "Come back," she whispered. "That's all I ask." The days that followed tested everyone. Women, children, and elders prepared to flee if needed while maintaining normal camp appearance. Maggie worked tirelessly, preparing medical supplies, organizing evacuation plans, keeping spirits up with steady competence. On the third day, Red Sky collapsed while hauling water. Maggie caught her, felt the fever burning through her skin. The pregnancy was taking a harsh toll on a body already weakened by grief and hardship. As she tended the young widow, Pale Moon's suggestion echoed in her mind. Here was a woman who might lose her child to privation, while Maggie remained strong but empty. The cosmic unfairness of it burned like acid. "You're kind," Red Sky murmured as Maggie bathed her fever. "The chief chose well, whatever others say." "Rest now," Maggie soothed, but her mind churned. What if Red Sky grew too weak? What if the child came early, vulnerable? What if— Walks with Wisdom appeared at her elbow. "That thought path leads nowhere good," the old woman said quietly. "The spirits give and take as they will. We cannot force their hands. But we could help them along," Maggie said carefully. If Red Sky agreed. If it meant her child would have a father's protection, a chief's resources. The medicine woman's ancient eyes studied her. "You think Standing Bear would accept such deception after what passed between you before?" "Not deception. An arrangement. Adoption exists. You said so yourself. Adoption after birth is one thing. What you consider." Walks with Wisdom shook her head. "Be careful, child. Trust rebuilt is fragile as spring ice." But the seed was planted, taking root in desperate soil. As Maggie continued tending Red Sky, she found herself imagining possibilities. Not lies this time, but creative truths, a way for everyone to have what they needed. Word came at sunset the soldiers had taken the bait, chasing phantom raiders deep into waterless canyons while the real band remained hidden. They would exhaust themselves and retreat. Mission failed. The Apache had won without firing a shot. But Standing Bear returned with news that chilled celebration. "More will come," he said simply. "The white government grows impatient. They want us on reservations or dead." That night, as the camp processed this looming threat, Maggie made her decision, not for deception but for honest proposition. She found Red Sky recovering in her shelter. "I want to speak plainly," she began. "You need protection. I need a child. Standing Bear needs an heir. What if we could solve all three problems? Red Sky's eyes widened as Maggie outlined her thought, not pretending pregnancy, but open adoption, bringing Red Sky into their household as sister-wife, sharing resources and protection. It wasn't unheard of. Apache men sometimes married sisters or took additional wives for practical reasons. You would share your husband. I would share the burden and blessing of ensuring the band's future, Maggie corrected. But only with honesty this time. Standing Bear would have to agree. The council would know the truth. No lies. Red Sky was quiet for a long moment. My husband's child would be raised as the chief's heir, with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails. I need to think. Maggie left her to contemplate, her own heart hammering. This felt right in a way her previous deceptions never had. Complex, yes, unconventional by white standards. Certainly, but honest. She found Standing Bear alone on their familiar ridge, staring out at the vast darkness. When she settled beside him, he pulled her close without speaking. The soldiers will return, he said finally. In greater numbers, we may have to choose fight to the death or accept the reservation. There's always another choice, Maggie said. Sometimes we just have to be creative enough to see it. He turned to study her. You have that look, the one that means you've been thinking dangerous thoughts. Not dangerous, just different. She took a breath. What if there was a way to secure an heir for the band, one that required no deception but asked us to think beyond traditional boundaries? His eyes sharpened. Speak plainly. So she did, laying out the possibility with careful words. Red Sky's situation, the child who would need a father, the way Apache tradition already accommodated complex family structures, the honest solution that served everyone. Standing Bear was silent for so long. Maggie feared she'd overstepped catastrophically. Then he spoke slowly. You would welcome another woman into our lodge, share the duties and privileges of marriage. I would welcome a sister, Maggie corrected. Someone who could give you what I cannot, while I give what I can. The white world calls it improper. But when has their propriety ever served us? He pulled her closer, his voice rough with emotion. You continue to surprise me, Margaret Collins, just when I think I understand you. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet. But his lips found hers in the darkness, and the kiss held promise rather than finality. Let me think on this, and speak with Red Sky yourself. Such a choice must be hers freely made. They returned to camp together, the future uncertain, but no longer impossible. The solution Maggie proposed was unorthodox, challenging both Apache tradition and white morality, but in a world where survival itself grew more complex daily. Perhaps unorthodox was exactly what they needed. The spring rains had come early to the Chiricahua Mountains, painting the desert with unexpected blooms. 8 moons had passed since Maggie's arrival, and the Apache camp buzzed with preparations for the coming child not growing within her, but within Red Sky, who had joined their household with quiet dignity 3 moons prior. The arrangement had shocked many, satisfied some, and gradually won acceptance through its practical wisdom. Standing Bear had presented it to the council not as deception, but as adaptation, the kind of flexibility their people would need to survive the changing world. Even Striking Eagle, faced with the reality of an heir versus continued uncertainty, had grudgingly withdrawn his most vocal objections. The lodge had expanded to accommodate their unusual family. Red Sky occupied her own section, maintaining proper boundaries while sharing daily life. What surprised Maggie most was how naturally they'd fallen into partnership, dividing tasks, supporting each other through the pregnancy's challenges, building something that transcended conventional definitions. You're not what I expected, Red Sky confided one morning as they prepared medicines together. The young widow had proven skilled at healing arts, her knowledge complementing Maggie's perfectly. What did you expect? Jealousy, resentment. The white women in the settlements. They guard their men like hawks guard prey. Red Sky's hand rested on her swelling belly. "But you've given me more than shelter. You've given me sisterhood." The word wrapped around Maggie's heart like a warm blanket. In trying to solve everyone's problems, she'd found something she hadn't known. She needed female companionship that went deeper than the casual friendships of the camp. Standing Bear had adapted too, treating both women with careful respect, navigating the complex emotional terrain with surprising grace. His joy at the coming child was tempered with consideration for Maggie's feelings, while his growing affection for Red Sky never diminished his connection to his first wife. "The white world would call us improper," he mused one evening as they sat together outside the lodge, all three of them, watching stars emerge above the canyon walls. "The white world calls many things improper that are simply practical," Maggie replied. "Their God gave men Abraham and Jacob multiple wives. They just forgot their own stories." Red Sky laughed softly. Listen to her, quoting their holy book to justify Apache ways. "Wisdom is wisdom, whatever its source," Standing Bear said, his arm comfortable around Maggie's shoulders while Red Sky leaned against his other side. "The spirits work through mysterious paths." But beneath the domestic harmony, larger threats loomed. Government pressure for removal to reservations had intensified. Soldiers patrolled ever closer to traditional Apache territories. Other bands had already been forced onto allocated lands, their leaders returning with tales of starvation, disease, and despair. Standing Bear spent long hours in council, debating response, fight to the death, flee deeper into Mexico, negotiate for better terms. Each option carried terrible costs. It was during one such debate that Maggie proposed what others couldn't. What if we controlled our own narrative? The men looked at her with varying degrees of confusion and irritation at the interruption. But Standing Bear nodded for her to continue. "The government fears what they don't understand. They see Apache as wild, dangerous, ungovernable. But what if we showed them otherwise? Not surrender, but strategic engagement. Send delegations, invite journalists. Show them we're not savages, but people with laws, families, culture worth preserving." "You would have us dance for their entertainment," Striking Eagle spat. "I would have us survive with dignity," Maggie countered. The Cherokee tried pure resistance. They were removed anyway. But those who learned to speak the white man's language, use his laws, work his systems, some kept their lands, their autonomy. "Your grandmother's people still lost much," Walks with Wisdom observed. "Yes, but they survived as a people. Their language, their stories, their children all continue." Maggie looked around the circle. "Is that not better than glorious extinction?" The debate raged for hours, but seeds were planted. Over the following weeks, as Red Sky grew heavy with child and spring turned towards summer, the band began preparing for a different kind of campaign, one of words and influence rather than bullets and blood. Standing Bear selected his most diplomatic warriors to learn English more fully. They practiced presenting their case why the Apache should be allowed to remain on a portion of their traditional lands, governing themselves while acknowledging federal authority. It was a delicate balance, pride warring with pragmatism at every turn. Maggie found herself at the center of these preparations, her understanding of both worlds making her invaluable. She helped craft letters to sympathetic officials, coached warriors on white etiquette, explained the incomprehensible logic of bureaucracy. "You've given us weapons we didn't know existed," Running Wolf admitted after a particularly intense session. "Though I still prefer my rifle." "Use both," Maggie advised. "The pen and the sword each have their place." As summer heat intensified, so did Red Sky's labor pains. The birth, when it came, was long and difficult. Maggie and Walks with Wisdom worked through the night, drawing on every scrap of healing knowledge between them. Standing Bear paced outside like a caged mountain cat, his usual composure shattered by helplessness. When the baby's cry finally split the dawn air, relief flooded through everyone. A boy, healthy and strong, with his mother's delicate features and his father's warrior's lungs. "What will you name him?" Maggie asked as she placed the cleaned infant in Red Sky's exhausted arms. Red Sky looked to Standing Bear, who looked to Maggie. In that moment, the unconventional family they'd built crystallized into something beautiful and whole. "Samuel," Standing Bear said finally. "Samuel Standing Bear, a name for both worlds, like the path he must walk." The band celebrated the birth with appropriate ceremony, the presence of an heir easing tensions that had simmered for months. Even Striking Eagle offered congratulations, though his eyes remained calculating. In the weeks that followed, their strange family found its rhythm. The baby thrived on the attention of two mothers, while Standing Bear proved as devoted a father as Maggie had imagined. The sight of him singing traditional songs to his son while teaching Maggie the words created moments of perfect contentment. But the outside world wouldn't wait for domestic bliss. Word came that government negotiators would meet with Apache leaders in 2 moons' time. The band's future would be decided through words rather than weapons. "Are we ready?" Standing Bear asked the night before their delegation would depart. "As ready as anyone can be for an impossible task." Maggie replied she would go with them. Her presence both asset and liability, proof that Apache could adapt, but also a reminder of how much they'd already been forced to change. Red Sky, recovered from birth but still nursing, would remain with the band. "Bring him home," she said simply, speaking of both Standing Bear and the future they hoped to secure. The morning of departure dawned clear and bright. Standing Bear, dressed in his finest regalia, looked every inch the chief, but it was the way he held his infant son one last time, whispering promises in Apache, that revealed his heart. "Whatever happens," he told Maggie as they mounted their horses, "you changed everything, my life, my thinking, my understanding of what's possible." The spirits knew what they were doing that night by the creek. "Even though I couldn't give you children, you gave me a future I couldn't imagine alone. Sometimes that's the greatest gift." As their party rode out, Maggie looked back at the camp at Red Sky standing with the baby, at Walks with Wisdom raising her hand in blessing, at the people who'd become her family through the strangest of circumstances. Whatever the negotiations brought, they'd already achieved something remarkable, a love that transcended convention, a family that defied category, a hope built on honest foundation rather than desperate lies. The trail ahead led to uncertain destiny. The powers they would face cared little for Apache ways or complex human arrangements, but they carried with them something more powerful than weapons or words, proof that adaptation and tradition could dance together, that broken people could create wholeness, that the spirits worked through channels both strange and wonderful. As they rode toward the rising sun, Maggie thought about the frightened woman who'd been brought to that ceremonial fire so many moons ago. That woman had seen only impossible choices, had believed deception her only tool, but truth, complicated and painful as it was, had proven the greater power. "Ready?" Standing Bear asked, pulling his horse alongside hers. "Ready," she affirmed, and meant it. Whatever came next, they would face it as they'd learned to face everything together, honestly, with hearts open to possibilities beyond imagination. The desert stretched before them, harsh and beautiful as the life they'd chosen. And somewhere behind them, a baby's cry rose with the morning wind, the sound of futures being born, of stories yet to be written, of hope refusing to surrender even in the hardest ground. Their love story hadn't followed any traditional path, but perhaps that was fitting for a time when all paths led to change. What mattered was that they'd found each other, found a way forward, found that sometimes the spirit's greatest gifts came wrapped in the most unlikely packages. The sun climbed higher, and they rode on toward whatever destiny awaited, carrying with them the proof that love could bloom even in deception's ruins, that families could be built from broken pieces, that the human heart was vast enough to hold contradictions and create from them something beautiful, true, and utterly their own. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'm curious to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening during your commute? Relaxing at home? Or perhaps on a long drive? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about Maggie and Standing Bear's unconventional journey and how their story touched you. Don't forget to let me know where in the world you're listening from. Let's connect across the miles, just as our characters connected across cultures.